Welcome to Historical Happy Hour, the podcast that explores new and exciting historical fiction novels. I'm your host, Jane Healey, and in today's episode, we welcome Melanie Benjamin to talk about her new book, California Golden. Welcome, Melanie. I'm going to do a brief intro and then and dive into questions. Sound good?
Okay.
Awesome. Melanie Benjamin is the USA Today and New York Times bestselling author of 8 novels, including The Swans of Fifth Avenue, about Truman Capote and his society swans, The Aviator's Wife, a novel about Anne Morrow Lindbergh, and Mistress at the Ritz, based on the true story of the American woman who ran the Ritz in Paris during World War II. Her books have been translated into over 15 languages, been featured in national magazines, and been optioned for film. Melanie lives in Chicago with her husband. Her latest novel, California Golden, just released on August 8th, number 8 on August 8th. Welcome, Melanie, and congratulations on your latest novel.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. So California Golden is about 2 sisters caught up in the California surf culture of the 1960s. Although the story encompasses much more than that era. Tell me about the premise of this novel. Just give the audience a basic premise.
Okay. Well, 1950, sunny California. Carol Donnelly is a housewife and mother who would rather be Gidget than Donna Reed. And she actually becomes an iconic pioneering female surfer in this early era when women were really not welcome on the waves. But in doing so, she frequently abandons and neglects her 2 young daughters, Mindy and Ginger. So the 2 girls come up with a plan. They're going to learn how to surf too, in order to keep up with their mother and not be left behind. And at first, the plan sort of succeeds, and Mindy, in fact, is a natural. She becomes an excellent surfer. Actually, kind of competes against her mother, beats her mother, which has all sorts of complications, and becomes a minor celebrity in those surf party movies starring Frankie and Annette. Ginger, on the other hand, is not comfortable on the waves, and she can't keep up with her mother and sister, and is sucked into the counterculture of the era, drugs and cults. And so it is the 2 sisters' journey back to each other against the psychedelic backdrop of the entire 1960s that is the heart of the book. It is about mothers and daughters. It's about sisters. It's also about the limitations women faced in this era, especially those who really weren't comfortable fitting into a mold.
Yeah, and I loved reading about this era because I hadn't read about it. I haven't read a lot of historical fiction in the 1960s. The last 2 authors I've had on were World War II. I recently wrote a World War II novel. It's nice to have a different era to talk about. I think this is a great, late August summer read. And one thing I loved, I read your author's note at the back, and you were really frank about coming up with a new story idea and how difficult that can be. And how you wanted to write something very different than your last novel, The Children's Blizzard, which was inspired by a devastating storm in the 1800s. So tell me about how you ended up finally deciding to write about 1960s California and this mother and her 2 daughters.
Well, it was a huge process. After The Children's Blizzard, I had made a career decision to change agents. And I did, and that was a very difficult decision. And I found a terrific new agent because I was really, kind of historical fiction was very, very popular for a very, very long time. But especially the biographical historical fiction that I kind of was known for earlier in my career is not so strong anymore. Plus, it's just I couldn't figure out what else to write about. It just seemed so crowded and overdone, and everybody was doing it. And I felt an urge to kind of shake things up a bit. I had done it a little bit with The Children's Blizzard, and that was my first historical novel that was not about a real person, that it was about a real event, but I invented the characters who were caught up in the storm. And I kind of wanted to do the same thing, but really go for a more youthful feel, contemporary feel. But it took me a really long time. I'm sure there are a lot of people, my publisher, who are very invested in my career. And they have to approve what I write next. And in my early years, it was never such a hard thing. I would just come up with an idea and they say, great, and you do it. But as time has gone on, and I don't know if it's a reflection of publishing today or the market or whatever, it's been really hard to get to get everybody many
Hmm.
people on board with what I do next. So I actually had several ideas of historical fiction all over the place. And I would write up a proposal and maybe a first chapter, and my agent shot down many of them, but some she really liked too. But then we would go into my publishing team, and they were not on board. And I could always write whatever I want, but you really want someone to be on board. You want your entire publishing team to be as excited about it as you are. That really helps make a breakout book.
Absolutely.
I had the idea of surfing early female surfers a few years ago and ran it by my editor back then, but she didn't like it then. But I went back to it this time. And I thought of it maybe of a different way into it than I had before. And it was really these women. I found a picture of a woman named Marge Calhoun and her two daughters from this era, and learned that they were this female surfing family. And that seemed to me so interesting that I used that photo as inspiration for my characters. They are not Marge Calhoun and her daughters, they're completely invented. But there are some certain similarities in the surfing world that they share. And that just led me to want to explore the idea of mothers and daughters and sisters in this era. So that was the one finally. And I want to say it took months of months and months, well, months to get to this place to get everyone on board.
I completely understand that. I think the idea is the hardest part sometimes because you have to live with it and be passionate about it, right?
And it is one thing I've learned in this long career, that you're going to be talking about your books for a really, really long time. Not just the part about writing them, which is going to take a lot of, takes your guts and your heart and your emotion, but afterwards. And I actually recently just put away a novel I was about 30,000 words into because I realized that I did not love it enough to and I've done that a couple times in my career, actually, only
Mhm.
after having written the entire book. This time I stopped early on. But yeah,
Oh,
that's a big part of it. Yeah.
yeah, I completely agree. So talk to me about the research for this book. What kind of sources? Did you come across anything that surprised you? Because it's an interesting era, and I mean, there was so much going on at that time, historically, culturally, politically.
Right. Well, I think like a lot of people, my immediate impression of the 1960s and the surfing scene was fun, fun, fun. Beach Boys, California Girls, Frankie and Annette, Gidget.
Yep.
And that was part of it. That was the aspirational, marketable part of it. But there were a lot of things I didn't know that were going on underneath the cultural appropriation part of it. You know, that surfing originated in with Polynesia, who they took it to Hawaii, and it was much more of a a kind of a celebration of nature and water and the sun. And then over the centuries, it became, symbolized by white California boys and girls. And so that was an interesting thing to discover. I always read a lot for my research. There's certainly a lot of books about surfing out there. You have to kind of, be careful. I know I was only researching this particular era. So anything having to do with like big wave surfing, which was not a part of this early surfing era, I did not read. So you have to be selective to know what you're looking, you have to know at least the time period. And so you don't have to read everything about it. I subscribe to something called the Surf Network, I think it's called. It's through Amazon Prime, and it is just tons of documentaries about surfing, movies about surfing, footage of old surfers. Also subscribe to something called the Encyclopedia of Surfing, which same thing. There was a lot of old footage, like from the 50s, of those early competitions, at which Marge Calhoun was at some of those. So that was really interesting. I did not learn how to surf. My husband and I spend a lot of time in California every fall at the timeshare we have, and it's in Newport Coast, Laguna Beach era. So I certainly get to watch a lot of surfers doing that, staying there. And California culture of that time period is just stuff I kind of already know just because I'm a history nerd.
Yep. I
Yeah.
love it. Um, So the book is told from three perspectives, primarily the sisters, Mindy and Ginger, but what part of it's also told from Carol, the mother's perspective. Was this a decision that you made up front, or was this something that evolved as you got more into the story?
I originally intended it to be much more the traditional, if you're doing 3 points of view, you alternate, right? So daughter, daughter, mother, daughter, daughter, mother, daughter, daughter, mother. But Carol's story begins in the 1940s. And so every time I would go into Carol's point of view, we'd be sucked back in time too far, I thought. It also seemed to me every time I got to Carol's point of view, if, in that traditional way, I was always eager to get back to the girls. Their story was the 1960s, right? And it's contemporaneous. They're both, in the same path, encompassing the same time period. And so I took the Carol points of view that I had put into this traditional 3 point of view structure, and I took them out. So then we were only reading about the girls' stories. And I thought that it read much faster that way, much more immediate, much more exciting.
Mm-hmm.
But I questioned whether or not I was even going to put Carol's point of view in at one point, but then I decided I did, and I had to. And I like doing it later in the book. So you get to know Carol through her daughter's experience with her. And she's not a good mother, and you form opinions about her that are not so nice.
Right.
Okay. But then when we get to the point when the girls were old enough, I think, to appreciate knowing more about their mother, we, the reader, knows more about their mother. This is when you get to go back in time and you understand the frustrations of a woman who did not want to be a housewife and mother, but who lived in a time when that was really the only thing she expected of her.
Mm-hmm.
And especially an athlete in the 1940s in high school who wanted to pursue her passion in athletics, and there were so few opportunities, especially if you get knocked up by your high school boyfriend, which, no spoiler, she does. And so it doesn't excuse the things she does to her children at all. But I hope in reading about her perspective later in that point in the book that way, we get a bigger picture of her at a time when I think it's important in the story, and we may understand maybe
Mm-hmm.
why
Mm-hmm.
she made some of the very poor decisions that she did.
Exactly. It gives you a deeper context for who she was and the choices that she made.
And in keeping it in that later section, it's just like we just get to concentrate solely on her for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that was really, really important to do for such an important um, figure throughout the book to her, especially to her daughters. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, how much of it is, how much of her as a character is based on Marge Calhoun? Is it pretty loose at this
Oh,
point?
yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, other than the fact that they were both athletes and they both went on a surfing safari in the 1950s, and they both had 2 daughters. And that's it. Everything
yeah.
else completely made up.
Right, right. I had to, of course, look up Marge Calhoun after reading the book because I wanted to, I always do that nerd deep dive after.
Yeah.
Um, that actually brings me to my next question too. Like, how do you strike a balance between fact and fiction in your storytelling? And are there any strict rules you adhere to with that?
Well, it's completely different when you're writing a book like California Golden than when you're writing a book like The Aviator's Wife, where you really are fictionalizing a known person, and you have to be a little bit more careful to, you're exploring the things we don't know about that person, mainly their feelings at the time, right? But you do still have to stick to some known parts of their life, not all of it, because you can't include it all. But in a book like California Golden, I really had to be true to the facts of the era as far as what people wear, what they talk about, what they're watching on television and the movies, and language things that change from era to era. And then, of course, with the surfing scene, there were certain things I had to be, had to include that were factual. But as far as the characters, then it's all my, I have a lot more freedom writing these kind of novels. But I am always very careful to concentrate more on character than I am on historical details. That has served me well. It's something that happened on by accident early in my career when I simply could not afford to go to Oxford, England, where the setting of my first historical novel was, to research it. I just didn't have the money. So it made me rely more on my imagination and concentrate more on the characters. And that is what I try to do in all my books, because I want to entertain. That's my most important job as a novelist, not give a history lesson.
Absolutely. And that actually, my first three novels, the main character protagonist was fictional. This last one was biographical fiction. It was based on a real actress, Drew Layton, and I found that very difficult. And you did a lot of biographical fiction in this one. In this
Yeah.
one, you took a break from that and have these fictional characters. Do you find one harder than the other, or are they just sort of different?
Early on, I found it very easy. I just felt like I was assuming I have a theatrical background, not a writing background. So I felt like I was just kind of pretending to be these characters as if I were playing them in a play. And I didn't think too hard about my duty to the historical record. I mean, I didn't make things up. I didn't, like, if things were known to have happened, I didn't completely change them, right? I stuck to a pretty, good timeline as far as the things that we knew happened. But I didn't worry too much about people asking me how much is fact, how much is a fiction. So that was a very freeing book to write. But as I've written these books more and more, people almost sometimes want me to get that and break it down line by line.
Oh yeah.
Is this fact? Is this fiction? Is this fact? And it's like, maybe you shouldn't read historical fiction if you're that concerned with it. And people have questioned, how did you know what Anne Lindbergh was saying to Charles Lindbergh during that moment? It's like, I don't know. I wasn't around then. I'm making that up.
Right, right.
Based on my true, based on researching who these people were, and then my imagination from that research as to how they would behave, right?
Right.
And but it gets tricky if you start to overthink it. And I think maybe I was starting to overthink it the more of these novels I wrote. Then also, to your, what I said earlier, it has become pretty a crowded genre. And I was like, I don't know who I could write about now that I could bring something new to the table.
Yeah, I understand. I understand everything you're saying. Believe me. These next few questions, I ask every writer, and they're more about process and
Okay.
creativity. And so, I just want to remind people, if you have questions after I ask these questions, put them in the chat or put them in the Q&A, and I'll ask Melanie after I finish my interview. So we talk a lot about plotters versus pantsers. Are you a plotter, or do you write by the seat of your pants? What is your process like?
Well, because with historical fiction, you can't write by the seat of your pants. You have to know, you have to take a life that is known, or a historical fact that is known, like the Children's Blizzard. And you have to look at that and you think, okay, where is my novel in all this? And you're not going to be able to include everything in every
Right.
story. You can't, because that's a history, that's not a novel. You have to make it personal. So you have to concentrate on, one or two characters' personal journeys, and it might not be their whole life journey. It might just be a special part of that. So once I've decided that, then I do have like a kind of a timeline. Again, when you're talking about a real person who's lived, or the things that happen to them that you want to talk about in your novel. So that gives you a basic structure
Mm-hmm.
for a novel. And I always do know where I'm going to begin it. And it doesn't always mean I'm going to begin it at the very beginning, and then where I'm going to end it. And that has not always been at the end of a life, but it is just the end of this particular story. So that's the structure that I have when I sit down to write. I also know who the main characters are. I, know what their personal journeys are going to be, pretty much. And then it's generally the minor characters that tend to surprise me more, as to maybe showing me what their journey is, or taking me in a little different path. With California Golden, because it wasn't so much structured in a specific life, I had decided I wanted to make it expand the entire 1960s, because I thought that's such an interesting decade.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much going on that I felt reflected these girls' journeys. So there were some basic parts of the plot I knew ahead of time. I'm not going to tell you what they are, because that would be spoiling it. then it's like the part of how they get from point A to point B to point C, that's the part I don't plan.
Okay.
That's
Interesting.
what
Yeah.
I let them show me. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So you're kind of a little bit of both then, right? You're kind
Yes.
of, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I do think knowing where to begin and where I'm going to begin and knowing where I'm going to end, even before I sit down, and knowing the basic ideas of what is this person's journey helps me avoid well, it helps me write fairly quickly because a lot of thought goes into this before I even sit down to write, and then also avoids writer's block because I always know, where the story's headed.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Um, of the whole process of the first draft, editing, all of it, like researching, obviously, what is your favorite part of the whole writing process, and what is the part you dread?
Um, well, I think, writing that first draft is the hardest part for me. But I don't make it too hard. I don't worry about it. I know when I sit down and write, and I try to write 2,000 words every day, I know that I'm not going to keep all those words. I know it, but they're going to get me a first draft, a
Mm-hmm.
very messy first draft that then I could go into my favorite part, which is revising that first draft. That's my favorite part. And I
Mm-hmm.
have to say, the longer I've been doing this, the more books I've written, my first drafts are not nearly as messy as problematic as they were, say, 10 years ago. I am better at this. Surprise. The more we do something, the better we get at it. But yeah, the revising part, that's when I really start to play with the language and I see the redundant words that I've relied on too frequently, and I go about trying to replace those words with something interesting. And yeah, that's the revising part is definitely my favorite part.
Me too. I love that part of it because it's like you have something to work with at that point. So then it's like, how can you make it better? I love that.
Right.
Yeah. You've published 8 novels. You have proven staying power in this industry, which is not easy, as we know.
Seems to get
Um,
harder at every book, I have to
oh,
say.
jeez, I know. And so I know we
Very
have
weird world.
aspiring. It's a very weird world. I think we're in a particularly weird time in publishing, and
I've changed so much since my first historical novel.
yeah, it's different times, and navigating that as an author is crazy
Yep.
sometimes. So I know we have some aspiring authors in the audience. What's the best advice you can give them about writing and the whole publishing journey?
Well, first of all, I think you have to be an avid reader if you want to be a writer. You have to love books so much, and you have to be reading what people are publishing today because that's going to tell you. You
Hmm.
can't say I want to write a book just like Mark Twain wrote. That's not going to fly today. So you really need to be reading what is written today and lots and lots and lots of it, and love, love, love books and words, and love the industry and support the industry that you want to support yourself, which means buy books.
Hmm.
Buy, don't. That's how you will get eventually a career yourself, is if people buy your book. So support the industry. Spend some time learning about the industries. It's easy because everything's online today versus
Yes.
when I was first starting out, when it really way back like in the early 2000s, not much was online, so it was a bit harder. Um, and attend industry, if you can attend book festivals, that's always a good thing. It's great to ask authors questions, but it's not great to monopolize their time if they're at a literary festival. It's not great to shove your manuscript in their hands. There's a fine
There's
line
a
regarding
balance there, right?
that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And to be honest, there aren't we're in-person events are not coming back the way that, prior to the way they were pre-COVID for whatever reason, but it doesn't seem like people are really going out to attend these things, and there maybe aren't as many of them, but there are an awful lot of things like what you're doing.
Yes.
So I would definitely tell people to continue to watch Jane, and there are other places out there, other, YouTube channels and Facebook groups that have authors on to talk about their books. And I think that's a really good way to learn it. It's something I didn't have.
I totally agree. And one, one podcast that I tell every aspiring author to listen to is it's actually my agent's podcast, The Shit No One Tells You About Writing.
Oh, wow,
Uh,
I've not heard that.
yeah, yeah, that one is excellent
Cool.
because the shit no one tells you about writing. They break down critique letters, and then they have an author on for the second half and talk about process, and
Ah,
it's really educational for writers, for
ah,
all writers really, but especially if you're just getting into it. Yeah,
yeah,
totally recommend that.
that's a good one. Thanks.
Yeah, good one. Yes.
I was going to recommend Jane Friedman's Hot Sheet is another. It's a
Yes.
newsletter you can
Excellent.
subscribe to, which
Hmm.
I find it very interesting. And also, if you subscribe to a thing called Publishers Lunch, Deal Lunch, what Publishers Lunch? Yeah,
Yes.
that's a great one to know industry news, and also allows you to search their database to see what kind of agent is representing what kind of book. So if you're writing cozy mystery, say, you can search cozy mystery and see what agents are currently representing that kind of work.
Yeah, that's a huge resource. Yes,
Yeah.
totally
Mhm.
agree. Yeah, and Jane Friedman's newsletter too. That's like
Yeah.
gold. Yeah,
Yeah.
yes. Um, so I another question I always ask, talk to me about this gorgeous cover.
Oh
Um,
yeah. I've got the
did you
thing.
have a say in the cover design?
They always give me a few iterate designs that they have worked hard on in house, and they've already rejected many of them before they show them to me. And in this case, I fell in love with this right away. It was originally a little bit redder and a little darker. It didn't have this kind of pretty blue yellow up here. But I liked the first version, and they all. But then they got some feedback from other people. Thought that it should be a little brighter and lighter, and that's what we came up with. So this was an easy one, first time. But
Oh,
I've had
nice.
yeah, but I've had some that were not so easy. And the only time I ever really, I'm not even going to say the book, but there was one book that I really regretted not speaking out more about the cover that I was not happy with, and I'm not going to talk about which book it was, but I think we need to speak out. But very few authors have cover approval. You
Hmm.
know, if I hate something and everybody else loves it, that's probably the way they're going to go. I mean, they listen to me,
Right.
definitely
Yeah.
listen to me and try to make me happy, and I appreciate that. But ultimately, it is the publisher's decision, not mine.
Yes. Same here. I get some input, but not final say for sure.
No, no,
No.
very few authors do.
Yeah,
Very,
no. So are you ready to talk about what you're working on right now or no?
I can't because I haven't started it yet. I know what it is, and I wrote the first chapter. I will say that it's. I'm just going to say it's about. It's one woman's journey this time, so it's not going to have as many multiple. It won't have multiple points of view. It's more. It's a kind of a triumphant journey of a woman in roughly the same time period as this, who starts out very a product of her time and place and gender, and eventually kind of throws off the shackles. And
Excellent.
that's all I'm going to say.
Sounds exciting. I can't wait to hear more. Before I take, there's some great questions in the chat and in the Q&A. What's the best way for readers to stay in touch with you?
Follow me, please, on Facebook and Instagram. Those are the only two social media platforms I'm on at the moment. Or you can subscribe to my newsletter on my website, melaniebenjamin.com.
Awesome.
Oh, I also forgot I have a podcast.
Oh, yes, I saw you had a podcast.
It's called Who the Hell Are We? And I do it with my best friend in the world, another New York Times best-selling author named Edward Kelsey Moore. And we both live in Chicago, and we have a podcast where it has evolved from just talking about, it's very chatty, so it's an awful lot about friends catching up and laughing. So that's good. But
Nice.
instead of just being strictly about books during the pandemic, during the pandemic, we both discovered we were staying up very late at night watching old Betty Davis and Joan Crawford movies. And so now we both love movies, and so we pick a movie, and usually kind of a classic movie, and we watch the movie, and then we talk about the movie, and then we recommend books that have similar themes to the movie. And
Oh,
it
that's
helps.
a great idea. I just followed you because I saw that you had a podcast, so I'm looking forward to listening.
I mean, our most recent movie was Gidget, because we were trying
Oh,
to read the
excellent.
book. So yeah.
Perfect. Um, so questions here. Let's see. I'll start with the Q&As. Did you have fun? Sharon Pearson, who is a longtime follower of the podcast and webinar, Thank you, Sharon. Did you have fun picking out the songs used in the book? A great selection to pick from.
Yes, I definitely did. And there's a playlist for California Gold. I'm not sure if that's what she's referring to as the playlist or songs mentioned in the book, because there is one section where Mindy's talking about a lot of songs. Yes, that was great fun. And putting together the playlist was I was trying to tell a story through the playlist that
I
was the
love that.
story of the book. And yeah, I mean, who doesn't love that music from that era?
The best. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely had a lot of fun with it this time. And most of my books haven't really had a lot of music in them or talk about too many, contemporary music songs. So this was, like in the 1880s, right? But this one
Right.
was a lot of fun, definitely.
Very cool. Christine Ma is another longtime friend and fan. Thank you for coming, Christine. I have read a lot of your books and love your novels. Is there someone who is a real historical person who you would have loved to have met and why? Good question.
Well, that's a good question. That isn't it. Yeah, I would have like loved to have had dinner with Truman Capote. I
Oh,
think,
that's a
that
good
would have
one.
been a great catty bitch fest. That would have been so much fun. And Diana Vreeland, who I also talk about in the Swans of Fifth Avenue, would have been so much fun. And Frances Marion and Mary Pickford, the women from the Girls in the Picture. Yeah. And I think in my secret life, I always wish I had been a member of the Algonquin Round Table back in the 20s.
Nice.
And all those people. So
Hmm.
yeah, a lot of them actually, probably way more dead people I wish I knew than living people. Which is a sad, sad thing to say.
Not so much if you're a historical fiction writer. Let's see what else we got. What books have you both loved recently? From Andrea Johnson. She asked this.
Okay, well, I'm looking at it, seeing what I have read recently, because I read a lot and then I forget. Oh, Little Monsters by Adrienne Brodeur
Oh
came
yeah.
out, was it August or July, which I really, really liked. I liked Hello Beautiful by Anne Napolitano very much. And there seems to me there is one book that I just loved and loved and loved, and nobody had read. And I'm trying to think. Let me look. I've got them all here on a handy dandy device, right?
Right. I'm
Um,
looking too for my list.
I'm trying to. It seems to me there was a book that I just was like, everybody has to read this book. Oh, The Road to Dalton. It's a book I picked up at a bookstore at in Petoskey at McLean and Aiken in Petoskey, and it's a quiet book about Maine, a small town in Maine in the 1980s, and it's just a
Oh,
lovely, lovely. I'd never heard of it. This is why I love bookstores, because you can walk in, and I love to look at the staff recommendations, table, and that's where I found this one, which I don't know if I would have found it any other way. Love, love, love that book.
The Road to Dalton, did you say it was
Mhm.
called? Okay, I'm gonna write that one down too. I know I do the same thing. I've got like this huge I've blown through a bunch of books this summer and then I forget.
I
Um,
know.
one of them, and I think I even mentioned on the last podcast because it was I just I just adored it so much. It's called We Begin at the End. Have you read that one?
I've read. Wait.
The author
No,
is Chris Whitaker,
no,
and
I don't
it's
know that
just
one.
a beautifully written, like part mystery, part family drama. And I was just blown away by the writing. We begin at the end. That was one.
Okay.
And I did read Rebecca. I'm a huge Rebecca Mackay fan. I read I Have Some Questions for You.
Hmm.
That was excellent. And
Yeah,
I'm a huge Ann Patchett super fan too. So I'm looking forward to her latest one too. So
yeah. I
yeah.
mean, yeah. That's the one book in bookstores I've seen everywhere.
Oh, yeah, exactly, exactly. So, but I also, I try to support other lesser known authors, and We Begin at the End. That's one. That
Okay.
was excellent.
I'm confusing that with Then We Came to the End by Jonathan Ferris.
Let's see what else. Oh, do you write on a laptop or do you write longhand? Linda Madura asks.
Oh my goodness, laptop all the way. I
I
would
do.
never have been an author back in the day when you had to have pen and ink and
No,
I couldn't do that. No. Oh, and my
I
thoughts go too fast.
I can't even read my own handwriting anymore at this
Yeah,
point. So
yeah,
yeah.
no, laptop all the way, baby.
Um, how do you think publishing has changed in the past 10 years? Great question from Carol Hockman.
I don't want to get into too much inside, the sausage making part of it, but 10 years ago we had Borders, we had bookstores in malls,
Yeah.
we had publications like that people read magazines, right? So we had Elle that had a book club, and people, and one of the Aviator's Wife was excerpted in Good Housekeeping, which was a huge thing for that book. That doesn't happen today. That doesn't exist today.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest thing is discoverability has become a huge, huge issue. How do we find books? Publishing hasn't quite figured it out. It used to be through book reviews, a New York Times book review, and walking into Borders or Barnes and Noble and seeing all these books up front. And today there is no Borders. Barnes and Noble does not have national co-op, which is a thing that I benefited from in the past with my books, where they would be several copies right in front of you when you walked into every Barnes and Noble. And they don't do that anymore. It's all, and so that I don't have that anymore. And it seems to me today the only way people hear about books truly is through those book clubs, the national book clubs, or Book Talk. And if you don't get those things, we are finding right now, this moment in time, that people aren't finding out about your books. And it's I don't, yeah, it's just it's just the old ways don't work or don't exist, I think, more. But I don't think anyone's figured out the new ways yet. I think there's an over reliance on certain aspects of social media that only works if you're already like Taylor Jenkins Reid and you have a million people following you on your Facebook page.
Or Colleen Hoover.
Or Colleen Hoover. People follow you after they hear about your book.
Mm-hmm.
They don't follow you to find out about your next book, right? So social media is still important. I think it's great for us to stay connected with our readers, but it's not particularly a way that people are truly finding out about books right now. So I think we don't know
I agree.
how to reach all the readers out there. Independent bookstores are always a wonderful way, but frankly, there are not as many of those as there were when I first started out. And many communities don't have them, and some communities have many. I mean, I'm blessed to live in Chicago, where we have a very thriving independent bookstore community, but not everybody does. So I hesitate to say there are maybe way more books being published than there were back then too, and that doesn't help things.
I agree. I agree with all your points. Yeah, we're in a weird time, and I don't think people know where the market's going to go.
No. I mean, you can't influence Book Talk. Those things are organic. Colleen Hoover didn't plan on that. Nobody at her publisher planned on that. They're happy it happened. But it seems to me that the Book Talk world, God bless them, they love their books. But they don't seem to talk about a lot of books. It seems to be like the same books kind of over and over and over and over. And maybe that'll change someday, but that just seems to be what it is right now.
Right. Yeah. Right now, that's what it is. And I think the Book Talk world is more focused, at least from what little research I've done on young adult fantasy and romance seem to be really big on there. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. More questions. A couple more questions. Let's see. This is a great question. Carol Hockman again. Talk about the title. Was it always California Golden?
Yeah, that was a tough one. I think originally I thought, well, of course we're going to call this California Girls. How could you not call them California Girls? But no, because there have been other books called California Girls, and no one was really excited about it. Then I went through a list of Beach Boy song titles and lyrics, and I really liked God Only Knows.
I love that song.
Yeah, one of my favorite Beach Boys songs. But my editor wisely pointed out that people would think it was a religious book. And that wasn't what it was. So then I just started California Dream and California Gold and blah, 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 blah. And I just threw out California Golden. I don't know why. It is the Golden State.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps that's what I was thinking. I like the idea of it, the kind of tinselly, sparkly part of California that isn't really the whole story. I like that kind of idea for it too. So I threw that out there. Everyone said, yeah, that works. And then we went.
Yeah. I know titles are hard too, right? Like really
Yeah.
hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so last comment, not a question from Marcia, and I think this is a great way to wrap up. Actually, this format is my favorite way to find out books to read and authors to follow, and I'm so thrilled about that, Marcia, because I started this during the pandemic, and I'm not a fast writer, so I like to keep in touch with like reader friends, and this is a nice way to support other authors and keep in touch with reader friends. So I'm so happy to do this, and thank you for coming on tonight. I wish you so much success, and you're one of these authors who's been around for a while, and I really look up to you for your longevity in the industry because it's hard, right?
Yeah, but you're making me feel 5 million years old.
No, I don't mean it like that at all. I just mean like you've written double the amount of books I've written, and it's like, oh, how does she do it? How do you stay up? It's very impressive, and it's more just that. Like I look up to authors like you who have stuck with it and been successful because I know how tough it is in this industry. So thank you again, Melanie, and thanks for listening to Historical Happy Hour. What we were just talking about podcasts. If you like this listening to be a podcast, please leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And of course, if you read Melanie's book, online reviews always help that as well. Yeah. Really important.
Make a book talk. Make a book talk.
Yeah, or make a book talk. And don't forget she has a newsletter and she's on social media as well. Thank you again, and have a great rest of the summer, and thank you everyone for coming on tonight.